Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video on the Gooners and Gloves Podcast channel. In today's video, it's going to be the 65th Gooners and Gloves Podcast, and I'm going to be giving you guys my thoughts and predictions for the Chris Eubank Jr. versus Benn fight happening on Saturday. This is a fight that I'm incredibly excited for. This is a fight that I was incredibly excited for 3 years ago, but through unfortunate circumstances, it was cancelled, and finally, on Saturday night, we get it, and I'm just so excited for this. Obviously, I wasn't, me personally, I wasn't around for when their fathers fought, so obviously when Benn and Chris Eubank Sr. fought twice, I wasn't around for either of them, but they were obviously two incredible fights that forever shaped British boxing into what it is today, so it's incredibly exciting, and we're now going to get to see their two sons fighting. Obviously this rivalry is very heated. It's gotten even more heated now, especially with the cancellation of the fight and all the back and forth, so it's just a fight that I'm really looking forward to. Hopefully we just get a great fight between two great fighters. I mean, I think they're both solid fighters. I think they're both, really good at what they do, and just hopefully we get just a nice entertaining fight, a good conclusive outcome, and just a very enjoyable night of boxing. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'll be looking to get my reaction to this fight out immediately after, because I'm actually going to be buying this pay-per-view. I rarely buy boxing pay-per-views, but this is one that I definitely think is worth it for me because I like all the fights on the card. And even though I won't be discussing the other fights on this video, I will be discussing them on the shorts that I upload, so look out for my shorts where I'll be giving my predictions for the other fights as well, so do look out for that. But anyways, in terms of what I'm going to be going over, so I'm going to go over my prediction, both fighters' records, how I think the fight's going to go, and I've actually decided to add a little new, something new to these prediction videos. I've actually decided to give a few keys to victory for both of them. Now, obviously guys, it goes without saying, I'm not a professional boxing coach, I'm not a professional boxer, so, end of the day, this is just my opinion, but I just thought it'd be quite fun, seeing as I am a boxing podcast, to give some of my thoughts on how I think they can both win the fight. So as you can see on the screen, I've got 4 keys to victory for both of them, which I'm going to go over in a little bit. So yeah, obviously before we start, the big thing to talk about is this rehydration clause. So in case you guys don't know, for this fight there is a £10 rehydration clause, and in case you don't know how that works, basically on fight day, the day before the fight, so tonight as I'm speaking, it's Friday, so tonight as I'm speaking, they're going to have to come in at 160, which is the middleweight limit, 160 pounds. And tomorrow on fight day, they can't go up any more than 10 pounds. So obviously, while this is in effect for both men, clearly this is a lot more relevant to Chris Eubank Jr. because Benn is already having to come up 2 weight classes. So he normally fights at 147, which is welterweight, but now we'll be fighting at 160, which is middleweight. Obviously, Benn isn't going to be able to put 10 pounds further of weight on until the next day. I'd be very surprised. I mean, considering he hasn't even cut any weight and he's actually been putting on weight, clearly he's not going to be able to just put on 10 pounds. So it is in effect for both men, but clearly a lot more relevant to Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr. on the other hand is going to have to be very careful with his rehydration, because normally what happens is if there's no rehydration clause, a fighter weighs in the day before the fight. Sorry, I keep getting mixed up. They weigh in on the weigh-in day, which is the day before the fight, and then between then and the fight, they've got they can eat as much as they want, they can drink as much as they want. Basically, they can increase their weight as much as they please, and they do that by eating and drinking, because obviously they've just had a weight cut, so obviously lots of weight came off, lots of water weight, so that's why you see fighters just look so much bigger on fight night, even though they looked tiny. I mean, Conor McGregor's a great example. The guy, you saw him at featherweight, he looked dead on the scales, and then the next day he looked massive, and that's because you're allowed to eat and drink as much as you want to put back on as much weight as you can. But obviously in this instance, because Benn is already having to come up 2 weight classes and Chris Eubank's the way bigger fighter, because of that, they've put in effect a £10 rehydration clause, which means that on fight day, Chris Eubank Jr. cannot weigh in more than 170, so you can only put on a maximum of 10 pounds back on, whereas ordinarily a fighter maybe would put on like 15 or 20 pounds. So yeah, just thought I'd explain that, because the rehydration clause actually does weigh into the prediction that I made. So yeah, I thought I'd just go ahead and kind of just explain that for anybody that didn't understand. So hopefully that explains it. Basically, ordinarily a fighter can put back on as much weight as they want between the weigh-in day and the fight day. However, because Chris Eubank Jr. is obviously a lot bigger naturally, and Benn's having to come up 2 weight classes, they've decided to impose the rehydration clause so that Chris Eubank can't just have like a 20-30 pound advantage. So that's the reason. It's definitely a tough thing for a fight to go through, but I do think it was necessary for the fight to be fair, because otherwise the fight would just never be fair because of the natural weight differences. So yeah, I thought I'd just quickly go on and explain that, and I will be referring to the rehydration clause a couple other times because, as I said, it does partly weigh into the prediction that I made. So without further ado, let's go on and get into it. So Chris Eubank Jr.'s record currently sits at 34-3 with 25 knockouts. That being said though, the 3 losses are all to elite fighters, so there's certainly no shame in any of the fighters that he lost to. Liam Smith's obviously a great fighter, George Groves is a very solid fighter, and obviously Billy Joe Saunders as well. Those are his 3 losses. All great fighters, all were world champions at one point or another, so no shame in any of those losses. And then Conor Benn's record is undefeated. He currently sits at 23-0 with 14 knockouts. That being said, that this is going to be his first time fighting this heavy, so I think 20 of the fights were fought, about like 21 of the fights were fought at welterweight, which is his natural weight, 147 pounds. And then a couple of the fights, his previous 2, were fought at 154 pounds. So yeah, that's kind of how it's looking with 14 KOs. Although all 14 of those KOs were when the fights were at welterweight. When they were at 154, they were both decisions. So yeah, those are their 2 records. So obviously both have solid records. Chris Eubank Jr. obviously has a lot more like big names on his resume for sure. Conor Benn definitely has a couple of decent names in there, but obviously Chris Eubank Jr.'s resume is undoubtedly more stacked. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into my prediction. So my prediction for this fight is going to be Chris Eubank Jr. by points or by decision, however you want to refer to it as. I do believe that this fight will go the 12 rounds, and as mentioned before, part of the reason I think that is because of the rehydration clause. So let me just go on and explain why I think the rehydration clause will result in this fight, in my opinion anyway, going the distance. So in terms of Conor Benn, obviously Conor Benn is having to come up 2 weight classes, and that's a really difficult thing to do, and it's very difficult for fighters to retain their power when they're going up that many weight classes. I mean, a good example was when Canelo Alvarez went up to light heavyweight against Bivol, and he just could not do anything to Bivol. He just was not affected by the shots whatsoever, and that's just because it's hard to carry your power up to the higher weight classes. And as we saw with Conor Benn in his last 2 fights where he fought at 154, the power just wasn't there. The power wasn't there. He wasn't really hurting his opponent too much, and it's just very difficult to carry your power up to the weight classes. So for that reason, I don't really see, obviously Conor Benn is very fast, he's very explosive, don't get me wrong, but I just think because of all the extra weight that he's going to be carrying, he's obviously going to be a bit more sluggish, a bit slower, still fast, don't get me wrong, I'm not, this isn't disrespect, he's still going to be quick, he's still going to be explosive, and I'll get into that in a second, but I do think naturally he won't be quite as quick and quite as explosive as he is at 147, because obviously he's putting on, he has to put on about 13 pounds, that's nearly a stone, that's like a good 7 kilograms, so that definitely will impact you a lot. I mean, imagine you guys right now with 7 extra kg on you, it's going to impact you. So I think for that reason, I just don't see Conor Benn being able to get the stoppage, because I just think he's going to be a lot heavier than he usually is, and I just think that's going to affect him. But by the same token, I also can't see Chris Eubank Jr. getting the stoppage because of the rehydration clause. Obviously, he's not used to rehydrating. First of all, 160 is already a really difficult weight for Chris Eubank Jr. to make. We've seen in the past how much he struggles to get down to 160, and obviously ahead of tonight's weigh-in, he has to weigh in at 160, so I think that's obviously going to have affected him. And obviously, he can't put back on as much weight as he normally does. He normally goes up like 15-20 pounds. He normally goes up a lot, whereas obviously now he's going to have to be careful not to go up any more than 10 pounds. So I definitely think that's going to affect him. So I think due to a combination of Conor Benn being a bit more sluggish and a bit slower due to the extra weight, and Chris Eubank Jr. maybe being a bit more tired, maybe having a bit less power due to the weight cut and also the rehydration clause, I do think it's going to come down to a decision win. And in terms of who I think is more technically skilled to be able to get the decision, I have to go with Chris Eubank Jr. In my opinion, he's the much more technical fighter. He's obviously got several advantages, including the height and the reach. So in my opinion, this is going to come down to an outboxing sort of fight. I don't see this being a stoppage. It could be, don't get me wrong, it might happen, and maybe I'll get egg all over my face after the fight, and in reality it's just going to be a stoppage, who knows. But I just personally think it's going to, because of those 2 factors, I think it will go the distance. And in terms of who I think can outbox the other, I've got to go with Chris Eubank Jr. He's obviously a lot more technically skilled. He has gone the distance more times. He's outboxed people more times, and end of the day, I just don't see Conor Benn being able to outbox Eubank. Obviously Conor Benn can definitely land heavy shots, don't get me wrong, he's very powerful. However, I just don't see I don't see him being able to outbox Chris Eubank Jr., and I just don't see him being able to get the stoppage due to that excess weight that he's carrying and the fact that it's going to be difficult to carry his power across. So I think for that reason, in terms of who's going to outbox the other, I just believe it's going to be Chris Eubank Jr. I think Chris Eubank's going to outbox him, and I believe he will, maybe not necessarily a comfortable not a comfortable decision, but like relatively, if you get what I mean. Like, I do think he'll get the decision win. I don't think it'll be a knockout. I think this fight is going 12 rounds in my opinion, and I do see Chris Eubank Jr. taking it on points. Now, in terms of how I think the actual fight's going to go, I do think that early on, Conor Benn's probably going to have the advantage, just because, in my opinion, obviously, this fight's going to start, I think Conor Benn's going to start a million miles an hour, in my opinion. I think we obviously know how fast and explosive Conor Benn is, and obviously, we've seen how heated this rivalry has become, so I do believe that Conor Benn is going to come out guns blazing for the first sort of 3 to 4 rounds, and that actually transitions me nicely into the keys to victory, and I believe that the first key to victory for Chris Eubank Jr. is going to be to weather the early storm. I think those first 4 rounds are going to be crucial for him to survive, because because in my opinion, Conor Benn's going to come out guns blazing. He's going to be getting on the inside. He's going to be just throwing loads of punches and haymakers, and I definitely think those first 4 rounds, Chris Eubank Jr. is going to have to be very careful to weather the storm. So that's why I said I don't think it's going to be a super comfortable decision, just because I do think those first 4 rounds there's going to be a lot of pressure put on by Conor Benn. Like I could definitely see this being like a Floyd Mayweather Maidana sort of situation. If you remember the first Mayweather Maidana fight, where for the first sort of like 4 or 5 rounds, Maidana was just all over Mayweather with tons of pressure, and I could definitely see Conor Benn doing that. So I definitely think for Chris Eubank Jr., one of the keys to victory is going to be to just kind of weather the early storm, weather the early pressure, survive the early storm from Conor Benn, and I think that's going to be very, very crucial. Conor Benn's going to be aware that his best opportunity, at least, this is my opinion, but I'd imagine his team are probably also telling him this, that his best window of opportunity to stop Chris Eubank Jr. and to beat him will be those first 4 rounds, when maybe he's a bit cold, maybe the fight's just started and he just kind of goes a million miles an hour. So I definitely think the first key to victory for Conor Benn is going to be to weather, not for Conor Benn, for Chris Eubank Jr., it's going to be to weather the early storm, and vice versa for Conor Benn. I think pressure is going to be a big key to victory. As you can see, I've got a key to victory there for Benn is pressure. I think Conor Benn is a fantastic pressure fighter. We know this. We've seen in all of his fights, even the ones where he's been a bit heavier, he always puts the pressure on. He always ensures to cut the ring off, and I think that's going to be very, very key. Obviously, he's the younger fighter. Benn is obviously significantly younger. He's obviously a bit, they're both quite hungry. It's a bit hard, but you could definitely argue that maybe Conor Benn's the hungrier fighter, the younger fighter. So I think for that reason, he's going to be able to sustain that pressure and sustain it for a good few rounds. So yeah, I think that's how the fight's going to start, in my opinion. I think sort of the first 4 rounds, I definitely can see Benn kind of being on top, just kind of loads of pressure, loads of relentless energy. And Chris Eubank, I think, will probably be a bit more on the defense in the first few rounds, just kind of survive that early storm, let Benn maybe tire himself out a bit, maybe let Benn swing a bit wildly. We obviously saw that this rivalry's gotten very heated, and we know that Benn is certainly someone who fights with emotion at times. He definitely is quite an, he can definitely be quite an explosive fighter, fight with emotion, and I'm sure that Chris Eubank Jr. is definitely going to be sort of taking that into account when preparing. So I think that's the first key to victory for both. I think for Eubank Jr. it's going to be to weather the early storm, and for Conor Benn to put the pressure on. So that's how I think the first 4 rounds are going to go. However, I think from the 5th round onwards, I think this is when the tide of the fight's going to start to shift. I think Conor Benn by this point will have started to tire himself out a bit from all the pressure, if obviously it gets that far. But I think Conor Benn by this point will have tired himself out, would have definitely, be feeling the pressure. Remember, he's carrying a lot of excess weight, which is definitely going to be weighing him down. Chris Eubank's obviously a bigger fighter, so we'll be leaning on him and tiring him out that way, maybe wrestling him in the clinch. So I think for that reason, from the 5th round onwards, I think is when Chris Eubank's going to start to take control, and that then takes me into the next key to victory for Chris Eubank Jr., which is going to be to fight on the outside. Obviously, there's a significant height and a height and reach advantage in this fight for Chris Eubank Jr. I think in the end, Chris Eubank has about a 4.5-inch reach advantage and about a 3 to 4-inch height advantage. Now, that definitely is significant, and obviously we know that Chris Eubank Jr. is fantastic at fighting on the outside. We know he's really, really good. Don't get me wrong, he's good at fighting on the inside as well, but I think for the purposes of this fight, it's going to be better for him to fight on the outside. So I think using his jab, using his cross, definitely is going to be very, very crucial. Kind of using those straight shots to keep Benn on the outside, keep him away from him, especially when Benn is putting on the pressure. And vice versa for Conor Benn, I think cutting off the ring is going to be very, very a big key to victory for him in this fight. Obviously, Conor Benn is the shorter fighter, the lighter fighter, and also the shorter reach fighter as well. So I think for that reason, he's going to have to cut that ring off, so then that way he can really put the pressure on. Obviously, pressure fighters, the best thing they can do is cut the ring off, and I think that's something he's going to have to do with Chris Eubank Jr., because I definitely think if he gets Chris Eubank Jr. on the ropes or maybe in the corner, it could definitely spell a long day for Chris Eubank Jr., because obviously Chris Eubank Jr. is decent at fighting on the inside, but definitely not as good as Conor Benn in my opinion, and that's why another key to victory for Conor Benn for me is fighting on the inside. Obviously, we know Conor Benn is relentless. He's very good at fighting on the inside. He's got fantastic body shots. His hooks and uppercuts are fantastic, and for that reason I've kind of put those two together for Conor Benn. Hooks and uppercuts, I think they're going to be crucial for him, and fighting on the inside. And if he can kind of just get on the inside, cut that ring off, maybe corner Chris Eubank Jr., get him against the ropes, I think it's going to spell a lot of success for Conor Benn, who's going to be able to land those hooks on the uppercuts on the inside. And I definitely think that's something that Chris Eubank will struggle with. But by the same token, if Chris Eubank can avoid being cut off, if he can pivot his way out of these situations, then I think that Chris Eubank on the outside is going to be able to really jab at Conor Benn, snap his head back with right hands, maybe uppercut him, and end of the day just kind of keep him on the outside. So I think that's another big one for him. I think timing is going to be huge for Eubank Jr., because obviously there's no doubt about it, Conor Benn is the faster, the hungrier, the younger fighter, so he's going to be way quicker, he's going to be way more explosive. That's just how it is. Conor Benn is only in his late 20s, I think, and obviously Chris Eubank is 35, so naturally there is a big speed advantage here for Conor Benn, especially as the lighter fighter. So I think timing is going to be very crucial for Chris Eubank Jr. Obviously Benn's going going to be punching very fast, throwing loads of shots at once, throwing loads of combinations. So I think if Chris Eubank Jr. can land one of those counter punches and also time him, I think it's going to be huge. And that's why I've put those two together, counter punches and timing, because I think those are both going to be massive for Chris Eubank Jr. He's going to have to really get the timing right. He's going to have to, do very well with that. And I think that's going to be very, very crucial for him, because obviously Conor Benn's going to be coming in, trying to get on the inside. So while he's throwing all those shots and while he's coming forward and being relentless, if Chris Eubank Jr. can land a good counter punch, time a good counter punch, I think that's definitely going to allow him to kind of get points on the scorecards and keep Conor Benn at bay. So all in all, as a summary, I think the first 4 rounds are definitely going to be probably more Conor Benn on top. I think he's going to be putting loads of pressure. I think Chris Eubank Jr. is maybe going to be a bit more defensive, but I think from the 5th round onwards all the way to the 12th, I think this is when Chris Eubank Jr. would have learnt the rhythm of Conor Benn, will start to keep him on the outside, land the counter punches, land the timing shots, and end of the day just cruise his way to a decision victory. Benn, I think, is going to put on the pressure early. I think he's going to cut the ring off, and I just think fighting on the inside and hooks and uppercuts are going to be a big part of his game plan, because obviously Chris Eubank Jr. isn't quite as good on the inside as Conor Benn is. So I think on the inside is when Conor Benn is definitely going to have success, but by the same token, Conor Benn is not good at fighting on the outside. So if Chris Eubank Jr. can keep him there, that's going to be very, very good for Chris Eubank. I think Chris Eubank is also really good at fighting on the back foot as well, which I think he's going to have to do at multiple points in this fight, because obviously Conor Benn's going to be coming forward relentlessly. So I think definitely fighting on the back foot is going to be key for Chris Eubank Jr. at multiple points, and vice versa. I think Conor Benn fighting on the front foot is going to be key. But all in all, as an ultimate summary, I think the first sort of 3 to 4 rounds are going to go probably to Conor Benn. He's going to put the pressure on. Chris Eubank Jr. is going to be a bit more just calculated, defensive, weathering the early storm and kind of reading the rhythm. And I think from round 5 onwards is when Chris Eubank Jr. is going to start to take advantage of the fact that Benn's tired. He's going to start to fight on the outside, land the counter punches, time the shots, and land some great combinations. And obviously Benn is going to be trying his best to put pressure on, cut off the ring, land the hooks and the uppercuts, and fight on the inside. So as a summary of the keys to victory, I think for Eubank Jr. it's weather the early storm, fight on the outside, counter punches and timing. And for Conor Benn, I think it's going to be pressure, cutting off the ring, landing hooks and uppercuts, and fighting on the inside. So that is going to be my final prediction for the fight. So I think Chris Eubank Jr. takes this one by points. Please let me know down below who you think is going to win. I'm so excited for this one. Please let me know who you guys got. I'm not going to lie, I did go back and forth a lot on my prediction, because I was thinking that maybe Conor Benn could get a stoppage, but I just think taking into account the rehydration clause and the experience difference and sort of the measurements, I just think that Chris Eubank Jr. outboxes Conor Benn and takes this one to points. But please let me know down below who you think is going to win. Have a great day. Really enjoyed filming this podcast, and please let me know if you guys enjoyed me adding in the keys to victory, because I really liked talking about them and it made the video feel a bit more analytical. So looking forward to continuing to do that. But anyway, I'll catch you guys tomorrow with the reaction to this fight. I'll be doing it right after the fight, so look forward at about sort of 11:30 p.m. whenever the fight finishes for my reaction podcast, and I'll catch you guys in another podcast soon. Bye bye.